Strasserism is a political ideology born out of a nationalist and a socialist base. If Hitlerism is today called National Socialism, then I guess Strasserism could be called Socialist Nationalism. Anton Drexler in 1918 first founded what is today referred to as the Nazi Party. Not long after that, in 1919, Hitler joined, and he quickly became the figurehead. And then not long after that, the Strasser brothers, Otto and Gregor, their organization joined in 1920. It became more and more a common event to see other right-wing groups start to solidify underneath the Hitlerian banner. Much like today, where there's many different fractions of the right and the threat of a solidifying left on the other side, these fractured wings, these parties, these different right-wing parties, started all to solidify themselves under Hitler as a reaction to the forming left and materializing right in front of their face. So all the right-wing groups, they started to form underneath one, and Hitler had that magnetism that was bringing everyone towards him. Now, the Strasser brothers and people like Anton Drexler, among others, were more idealists than anything else. The parties they built, the ideologies they had, were built on principles that were meant to be the law over any leader. Much like the American president is supposed to yield to the Constitution. This is kind of how Drexler and the Strassers set up their system. Now, Hitler was a more pragmatic character, let's say. The parallels can actually be drawn till today in the American election cycle going on right now. Hitler entered the German Workers' Party as Trump did the Republican Party, in name only. Hitler was not bound to any set political ideologies drawn up by Drexler. He instead used Drexler's party as his launching pad, much like Trump did with the Republican Party. And just as today the establishment Republicans resent Trump for essentially outshining them on their own stage, so were the more leftist and idealist of the Nazis in resentment of Hitler's surged popularity, especially since he was not beholden to any ideologies outside of his own will. So the beer hall putsch happened, and this is when Hitler tried to take over the government with force. It failed. He ended up going to prison. They ended up outlawing a lot of Nazi activities and speeches. The party got fractured. It broke up into different segments, mainly the northern Nazis and the southern Nazis. And in the north, it was run by Gregor Strasser at the time. And they had kind of made up their own little platform, and it was basically similar to what the Strassers had in their original party before they went in with the Nazi party. So this fractured Nazi party wasn't doing much in the time that Hitler was in prison. It took him getting out and unifying everyone and getting the ball rolling again so they can continue on their pursuit, their goals. And this, more clear than anything else, just shows Hitler's importance to National Socialism. That term wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for Hitler. And you could see just simply, you remove him from the game, the party kind of falls apart. It fracturizes again, and it's exactly what it was before he was around. So it kind of goes back to that. But he gets back out. He unifies the party. He met with Gregor Strasser after he got out, and as he was seeking to unify his party in what is called the Bamberg Conference. Gregor laid out his ideological platform to Hitler, and Hitler largely ignored it and unified the party anyways. So Gregor Strasser, he would stick around with Hitler for a bit longer, but that was the last straw for his brother Otto. Otto would have no more of it as he disbanded from the Nazis a little later on, and he would go on to create his Black Front organization. And the platform expressed by Gregor at the Bamberg Conference is the political ideology that later went on to be called Strasserism. As Otto Strasser states in his book, Germany Tomorrow, these main lines formed the substantial content of the so-called Hanover Program, which was adopted in 1925 as the program of the North German group of National Socialists, and became the cause of my breach with Hitler. After 1930, it was the official program of the Black Front. Otto ended up fleeing Hitler's reach, running country to country, all the meanwhile trying to stoke the flames of German revolution against Hitler. Gregor, for his part, he stayed in Germany and remained in Hitler's good graces for the most part, for a while, but eventually was forced out of the inner politics of the Nazi Party. Or it can even be said that he forced himself out because he officially resigned. And after he resigned in frustration in 1932, he stated, "Whatever happens, mark what I say. From now on, Germany is in the hands of an Austrian who is a congenial liar, Hitler, a former officer who is a pervert, Röhm, and a clubfoot, Goebbels. And I tell you, the last is the worst of them all. This is Satan in human form." So definitely Gregor Strasser didn't have a high opinion of Goebbels. That's because Goebbels was with them, actually, and it was part of the Strasser team. And he essentially betrayed them for Hitler. But Goebbels would defend himself and say, "No, I was just convinced that Hitler was more right than the Strassers." So there's two sides of the story, as always. But from Gregor's point of view, he was a traitor. So obviously he didn't leave on the best of terms. Gregor, for his part, was later murdered in the infamous Night of the Long Knives. Now, despite his harsh words in 1932 and his resentment of Hitler, Gregor was allowed to remain in Germany, and on the surface it seemed he had gotten out of politics altogether. But there were rumors he was involved with Röhm and outside investors in a plot to overthrow Hitler. Otto Dietrich, press secretary to the Third Reich, in his memoirs states, Hitler claimed he had proof that Röhm and his immediate subordinates intended to carry out a putsch against the army, and that along with Gregor Strasser, they were conducting negotiations with foreign powers to muster up forces against Hitler. While it has not been proven how accurate and deep this conspiracy ran, it is plausible that it was taking place, but yet it is still uncertain if Hitler had a direct hand in ordering Strasser's death. Conventional wisdom seems to imply Hermann Göring had more to do with Gregor's murder than Hitler. In fact, it is claimed that the whole death list drawn up in preparation for the Night of the Long Knives kind of resembled the whole scene of the Second Triumvirate when they did their proscriptions list. Augustus Caesar, Mark Antony, Marcus Lepidus, 2,000 years ago, had drawn up their own list on all the senators who were political enemies of theirs as they were re-entering to take control of Rome. And it got to the point where people were just throwing names on the list of people they simply didn't like. They had nothing to do with politics, people that annoyed them, people that they just wanted to simply take all their wealth. And this seems to the death list for the Night of the Long Knives might have had a little bit of this going on as well, especially involved with Himmler and Göring. So they might have had their own liberties. As Hitler's personal friend, Heinrich Hoffmann, states in his memoirs, "I hastened to Hitler, who seemed deeply moved. 'Think of it, Hoffmann,' he said, gripping my arm and speaking with obvious emotion. 'These swine have also murdered my good father Stempfel.' Later, when I asked Hitler what had happened, he cut me short with an abrupt gesture. 'Not another word,' he said, commandingly. And so it has remained all the years that followed." Now, Father Bernard Stempfel was a Catholic priest and a journalist who helped Hitler edit Mein Kampf. There are many theories, conspiracy theories, as to why Stempfel was included on the death list. Everything from he simply knew too much about Hitler and Gili, his niece, or even his attacks on an SS general named Christian Weber, who Stempfel was attacking his morality and his character. So, maybe through Himmler, they threw him on a list just to shut him up. Whatever the case may be, at least from Hoffmann's account on Hitler, Hitler had no say in the matter. Now, Gregor Strasser, while continually bumping heads with Hitler in inner politics, was also there for him in his time of need when Hitler's niece Gili died. Many people feared that Hitler would take his own life. Gregor reportedly talked him off the proverbial ledge a few times in that 2-day period after Gili's death. Once again, from Otto Dietrich's memoirs, When Gregor Strasser returned, he reported that he had the greatest difficulty rousing Hitler from his severe depression. Gregor was there. Gregor Strasser was there when Hitler returned back from, because when his niece died, he was told as he was en route to another place, so he had to drive back, and Gregor met him there and kind of told him, and he was there at that moment, and you know, was there for his hardest time. And also, a lot of the times, Gregor Strasser spoke on Hitler. It wasn't always so negative towards Hitler. It was more about the people that surrounded Hitler, and he felt that there was a lot of negative influence going on by the people around Hitler, more so Hitler. So there wasn't this hate for each other. It wasn't like as it was with Otto Strasser and Hitler. This was different. This is why Gregor, you know, felt safe still living in Germany. Now, so it's unclear if Hitler is directly responsible for Gregor's death, but whether he knew or not the names on the list, what is known is that he took full responsibility and credit for all the deaths of that night. So whether he personally initiated it or not, certain names on the list, he definitely took credit for it, and he definitely wasn't super mad about it because no one was punished over it, so over any of the killings. An interesting note, in 1940, Otto Strasser documented in his memoirs, Hitler and I, something his brother had told him in their last conversation before Gregor's death. He states, "You'll see, my brother said to me, Adolf will end by blowing his brains out." Now, Gregor allegedly told him this in 1933. So, you know, one wonders if Gregor came to this conclusion after his experience with Hitler after Geely's death, because it was said that he did have to talk him out of killing himself. That suicide is something that came up in Hitler's darkest times. Now, speaking of Otto Strasser, of course, unlike his brother, he was very bitter towards Hitler. In fact, so bitter, and once again, who can blame him for being bitter? He did murder his brother. Otto did have to flee from Germany and everywhere else because of Hitler. But he was so bitter that, you know, what he says about Hitler has to be taken with a grain of salt. He seems susceptible to making up claims about Hitler and even outright lying at times, all with the intention of trying to make Hitler look like a lesser man. I have read virtually all the memoirs of Hitler's inner circle, and out of them all, there are only two outliers. There's Hitler's Memoirs of a Confidant by Otto Wagner and Hitler and I by Otto Strasser. Outside of those two books, the rest of the memoirs, about 10 books overall, all paint the same character of Hitler. Now, it turns out the Otto Wagner guy was not really in Hitler's inner circle and was only around for a short period of time. So this kind of explains some of the discrepancies with his memoirs. Meanwhile, the Otto Strasser memoirs did seem to be flat-out lies. The picture that Otto paints of Hitler was nowhere to be found in any of the other memoirs. In fact, Otto even got the simplest things wrong, like when Hitler became a vegetarian. And he also made outlandish claims about Hitler, like Hitler killed his niece, but with no proof outside of his bitter words. And he just paints this whole picture that Hitler is a scared guy. He was scared to debate Otto. Otto would, when they got into the room together, Otto was the alpha male. Just when you read his memoirs, you can kind of see, and just numerous of the things he says, like Hitler was no fan of nature, and you know, everyone else in every other memoir says exactly opposite. It's there's just numerous things about his character that Otto states that is completely contradicted by the numerous other memoirs of people that were in Hitler's inner circle for a long period of time. So it looks like Otto Strasser took liberties on Hitler in his books or in his memoirs. But with that said, let's see what led to the original split. We'll take a look at some of the tenets of Strasserism. So we'll break down Strasserism in three different components. First, the economic policy, then the functionality of the state, and then the cultural attitudes. The three major tenets of his economic policy are autarky, a state monopoly of foreign trade, and a currency standard of our own. Autarky, self-sufficiency, i.e. adequate domestic sources for the supply of raw materials, is a necessary antecedent to the satisfaction of the main demand of a socialist national economy, the safeguarding of food, clothing, and shelter of the community. The most important raw materials that are lacking, cotton, oil, rubber, can in part be replaced by such substitutes as artificial silk and flax, in part by synthetic products. Efforts to make our national economy independent of the rest of the world will be facilitated by simplifying the lives of our fellow countrymen. Under the capitalist system, a great many daily needs are artificially developed by advertisement. Simplifying life would not mean a relapse into barbarism, for culture is not dependent upon luxury or upon gratification of the needlessly created wants. In a true fellowship, no one would make a to-do about satisfaction of such needs while any of his fellow countrymen were going hungry from the lack of work. National autarky cannot and must not be the last aim of the socialist economic policy, for we are not concerned with a Spartan ideal, but with a Dionystic ideal, in the profoundest sense of the term. Consequently, this national autarky can only be a transitional phase through the present international situation. Makes us suppose that it will be the terminal phase of German socialism. So basically, the self-dependent economy they're not absolutist in the sense that they want to remain strictly self-dependent or strictly off of their own materials. They are open for trade, as we'll go into right now, but they're saying first there needs to be extreme self-dependency so they can know that they can survive without the international markets. So far as important of raw materials or luxuries seems necessary or desirable, the German people will export some of its own wares in exchange for the requisites. The exchange will not be effected in accordance with the arbitrary wishes of individual producers, but in accordance with a plan drafted to suit the needs of the state, and this will involve the existence of a state monopoly of foreign trade. Such a state monopoly will not, as does the Russian, aim at conducting the foreign trade, but will merely supervise and give license for export to such persons as may need them. The monopoly will also suit the needs of a planned economy, without which a socialist economy is impossible. So basically, all the foreign trade is taken out of the individual corporation's hand and put into the state's monitoring. While they're not on the ground level controlling and deciding everything, they have oversight over the trade to see if they disapprove or approve of anything coming in or out of Germany. And they make these calculations through the planned economy. All right, and lastly, out of his three big points is the currency standard of our own. Abandonment of the international gold standard will be an essential preliminary for autarky. For so as long as the foreign world can have any influence on our currency, which is the blood of economic life, no really independent national economy is possible. The commodity money, gold, has moreover a peculiar quality which attaches to no other commodity, namely the power of increasing itself through interest, occurring while it lies idle, and the owner does nothing at all. This quality of gold is not natural but artificial. The natural purpose of money is to facilitate exchange. Money is a means of exchange and a measure of value. So he's basically saying, like a bar of gold. I can have a bar of gold sitting in front of me right now, and today it could be worth, let's say, $1,000 for this bar of gold, and then tomorrow it could be worth $1,200, or it could be worth $800, and nothing with this bar of gold has changed. None of the minerals have increased or decreased inside of it. None of its usable talents have changed within the day, but yet the value can inflate and deflate simply on speculation. And for this reason, Otto Strasser was against the gold standard because this is a way for countries to hold sway over your economy. And Strasser takes this viewpoint where this currency, this money gold, is an abstract concept. So why give this power over your society, over your country, to people that can speculate and inflate and deflate the value of this rock that we're supposed to base our whole economy off of? And as of today, of course, we don't use the gold standard anymore. Basically, money is an agreement. We agreed to accept it, and it kind of keeps it going. It's really backed by nothing right now except our faith in it. Now, on private property, the Strasserist believes the transformation of economic policy by the establishment of autarky, a state monopoly of foreign trade, and a currency standard of our own, subsumed under the comprehensive term of a planned economy, is today regarded as necessary by numerous groups in Germany and elsewhere in Europe. But this theoretical recognition of a planned economy will remain sterile as long as there are groups still cling to the prevailing capitalist economic law which decrees that private property is sacred. One who takes his stand upon the maintenance of private property and land, the raw materials that lie beneath the surface of the land, and the means of production in general, is not only repudiating German socialism, but is also defending what will make a planned economy impossible, no matter how adherently in theory he may desire it. The abolition of private property in land, raw materials that lay beneath the surface of the land, and the means of production is the main demand of German socialism, and the presupposition to a planned national economy. Now, Strasser's view on private property is basically that the resources should not be monopolized by independent companies, that these are things that need to be oversaw by the state. So for this reason, he did not believe in private property. This also goes towards not only the big companies, but this comes down to the working class families too. So private property is a touchy subject, but the Strasserites believe that there should be no private property. Now next he goes into what he calls entails. Now, as the translator of the book Germany Tomorrow points out, that the word entail really doesn't make too much sense to what he's in translation. So they said the word usufruct is probably what he was going for when he says entail. And usufruct is the right to enjoy the use and advantages of another property short of destruction or waste of its substance. So when he's saying entail, basically he's saying that. And we can also interpret this kind of as like the Brazilian integralist syndicates they wanted to set up. Same kind of mentality here with the entails and the usufruct. So let's just get into a little bit what he says about that. Probably clarify it a little more. Then, first of all, let me insist that the German has a longing for his own peculiar style, for independence, for delight in responsibility and joy in creation. The lack of possibilities for satisfying this longing constitutes the taproot of the homelessness, the disconnect, the purposelessness of existence of the latter-day German. He suffers, in a word, from the proletarian character of his life, from his lack of possessions, from the hopeless prospect of his old age, and from the dependence of his presence. To de-proletarianize the German must therefore be the main task of German socialism. This brings us to two apparently contradictory demands of German socialism. 1. No German shall any longer have private property in land and raw materials that lay beneath the surface of the land, and the means of production in general. 2. Every German shall have possessions in these same things. The escape from the apparent contradiction between these two fundamental demands of German socialism can be made by something which we were the first to advocate in the introduction of entails. To make this demand intelligible, we must briefly discuss between private property and possession. To have a thing as one's private property means that one can do what one likes with it and can sell it, injure it, or destroy it at will. To have possession of a thing means usufruct, that one is entitled to use the thing, to exploit it, but subject to the will and supervision of another. the substantial owner whose private property it is, i.e. the state. The proprietor of the entire German national economy will henceforward be no one other than the community at large, the whole nation. But the nation, or its organizational form, the state, will not run this economy by itself. It will hand the national economy over, fragmented, and in trail for exploitation by German individuals or German groups. This watchword of entail forms the core of German socialism. So these are these syndicates he's talking about, and we'll get a little more into how they work when we break down the aspects of the functions of the state with Strasserism. So he's basically saying that you have possession of the property, but it is not your private property. It is just yours as long as it's deemed to be yours by the state. I mean, to be honestly. So there is a responsibility to it. If they come and see you're doing something, they don't want you doing on your property, well, then they can step in and they can take the property away from you. They can run you out of there, etc., etc. So that's what he's saying. You're in possession of the land, but it is not your land. How this land would be paid for, Strasser spoke about a land tax. So instead of paying mortgages on your house or paying some individual company, you would be paying a land tax to the state for the property you own. Those who understand that life in our huge tenacular towns is a dangerous to the human race cannot fail to regard the systematic de-urbanization as an urgency required for the sake of the people. De-urbanization will also be the logical consequence of the establishment of autarky and the introduction of entails. As regards to peasant farming, since both will make it necessary that Germany should be agrarianized once more. No sane conservative will admit that it is reactionary to shatter, as far as may be desirable, the idols of mechanical technique. It is assuredly time for Germans to end the tyranny of the technique, to overthrow the dominion of the machine, and to make technique and the machine once more servants instead of masters, for their domination has been an unmitigated curse. So Strasserism has this idea of limiting the cities, making them smaller, pushing people back more to the countryside. How the structure is set up, it's very agricultural. A lot of people would be pushed out of industry and back into farming, back into tilling the soil, so to speak, and more into towns and countrysides. So this is his whole view of de-urbanization. He felt the cities were bad places for numerous reasons, even for something as attack to use, like poisonous gas attacks could kill, a lot of people in a city, but if people are more spread out, it's less likely to have damage like that. So de-urbanization was definitely a big part, and also kind of cutting back on the machinery and technology. He's a little Ted Kaczynski-like, or maybe Ted Kaczynski was a little Otto Strasser-like in that sense. Industry and wholesale trade. In this way, the state acquires a decisive influence upon the supply of an industry with raw materials, and it must be in the position to cope with the requirements of production for use. Thus, besides the manager and the staff workers, there must be a third party to the affair as representative of the community, and there are all three factors concerned in any industrial enterprise: manager, staff workers, the state. The factory fellowship. Manager, staff of workers, and the state are all three partners of any enterprise. They constitute a factory fellowship. In return, there will be a payable to the state an impost corresponding to the tithe payable by the agricultural enterprise, the amount of which will be assessed at regular intervals, 5 or 10 years, let's say. Management, possession, and the profits are thus assigned in thirds to the manager, to the staff of workers, and to the state. So you can imagine there's less managers than workers, so the managers are going to make more than the workers, but the profits are divided in thirds. And I believe it'll be up to management too to disperse amongst the workers the pay as well. So this does give the opportunity for the managers to make more money than the workers, but in order to avoid monopoly, Strasser goes on to state, no matter how much money a man may have, he will not be able to buy portions of an enterprise, which can now be held only in fief. But the decisive point is that under the conditions that will prevail, even the ownership of vast sums of money cannot lead to capitalism, because although the commodities of the kind that can be multiplied as much as you please are purchasable to any account, monopolies such as land, the raw materials that lie beneath the surface, and the means of production in general are not purchasable at all. So they avoid capitalist monopolies by, and you just simply can't purchase more of the company. You can't purchase more of the land. You just can't do that. So if your company is successful, your workers will make some more, the managers will make some more, the state will make some more, but that's where it stops. You can't branch out, buy new lands, open up new stores, unless these things are approved by the state. So once again, you have that planned economy overseeing what's going on. The guild or corporation. Handicraft enterprises, small shops, and also the liberal professions will therefore be incorporated into guilds. The state will grant the guilds certain rights over their members, and in return the guilds will undertake to collect from their members the contributions which will make up the lump sum due from each guild in the way of taxes to the state. One of the main objects of German socialism is to combine the personal egotism that is a necessary and a useful part of our human equipment with advantage for the general welfare, much as the working of an engine propels the automobile. And that's a very fascistic principle right there, is getting your individual self to contribute to the collective, making it individually beneficial to contribute to the collective, to be a part of the collective. So it's finding that middle ground between absolute individualism and absolute collectivism. In these guilds, once again, these are like syndicates. So you got your syndicates for the agricultural field, and you have your syndicates for, like he's saying, handicrafts, small shops, liberal professions, things of that nature. So this, and we'll get more into it as in his state makeup, but this is what Strasserism tries to do, is group up humans according to their commonalities, according to their regional area, and according to their professional lives. Public assistance. So this is his last part of economy goes into, is the public assistance. Public assistance comprises care for those of the community who are no longer in a position to gain their own livelihood. The main significance of the term community or commonwealth is that no one who belongs to it shall have to endure the miseries of poverty. For the duties which every citizen owes to the community are also entail rights, being set off by the duties which the community owes every citizen. The principle implies the need for a comprehensive system of national insurance covering childhood, unemployment, accident, old age, and death, supplemented by voluntary insurance. In contrast with the existing methods, the whole complicated system of insurance and support would be replaced under socialism by a unified life insurance. Every citizen would thereby be insured in a way that would guarantee him a sufficiency, whatever happened, and no matter whether he or she was temporarily or permanently unfitted. Every citizen, moreover, by payable of supplementary premium, would be able to secure in case of need an allowance supplementary to that provided by the National Insurance Scheme. As a matter of organization, this would mean that all private insurance companies would be fused into one comprehensive national insurance scheme, which would be directly connected to the Reichsbank. Desires for individual variations and what is regarded as a minimal subsistence would be met by having different grades of insurance. The lowest grade will be compulsory, and the premiums would be automatically deducted from wages or salary. So that's your insurance, that's your welfare, all under one supervising organization. And it sounds like you can opt in for different levels of, I guess, welfare or retirement, depending on how much you'd like the state to take out of your wages. Now, that is it for the economy. They don't go into any kind of national health care, but they do go into, as we'll see in the culture, national education. So I can only imagine the healthcare is also national. It would seem a little out of place if it wasn't, if they had a capitalistic method of healthcare, which wouldn't make sense. But he doesn't mention it in his platform, but I would just assume it'd be a national healthcare that they were doing underneath Strasserism. The state is not an end in itself, but something whose aim is, or should be, to deal with the organism of the people, or nation, that it may most effectively utilize all the energies that will enable the community to maintain itself as against other communities in the world. It follows from this that the state is always determined by the peculiarities of the people. No people can take over intact the state forms of another. When the form of the state is adapted to the peculiarities of the people of one country, our organic outlook makes it plain that this form of state cannot be perfectly adapted to the peculiarities of any other people. So basically, people are not interchangeable. You can't take people out of Somalia and put them in Germany and expect them to become Germans culturally, ethically, work ethic wise, etc., in every way possible. That's just not a reality, and Strasserism acknowledges that. Once again, fascism is organic. You can call Strasserism, I believe you can define it as fascism, but anyways, it's organic, and this is what he's saying there, that this is an organic belief. This is a Germanic organic belief, and this, what German Strasserism, i.e. fascism, looks like, might not be the same for Somalian fascism. It might be something completely different. So people are not interchangeable. All right, so now let's go into like how the function of the state, how is the state set up. Now this video is not a in-depth dissertation on the inner workings of Strasserism. It's more of an introduction to Strasserism. So to go through these different levels of government and society and explain how each is created, how many is in each, and the safeguards of each level would be just consume too much time for this video. So this is going to be a quick brush through of the society, the state-structured society that Otto Strasser and I'd imagine Gregor Strasser too had a hand in this. So first you have three major forms of government. You have your president, your great council, and your chamber of estates. And now out of these three, much like how business is split into thirds, your managers, your workers, and the state, so is the government. You have your president, you have your great council, and your chamber of estates, and the power is divided by the three. So this is an attempt to set up possible checks and balances to the president. But when you go into the inner workings, you can see ways things can be manipulated, etc., as every form of government. But here's how he has it set up. So you got the president at the top. The president is elected, but it's elected not by the general masses, but by the Great Council. Once the president is elected, he rules for life. So it's like an elected dictator in a sense, although his whim is not law, or at least it's set up to where it possibly is not law, because like I said, you have these checks and balances kind of set up. So the Great Council will elect a president. The president will rule for life. And Otto Strasser believes he should rule for life because he's less likely to be, subject to corruption, because he doesn't need to depend on people's money now. He doesn't need to depend on winning votes and doing these things, so he can just be who he is and do what he thinks is right and best for the country, because now he has no incentive. He is the leader for life, or until he can't, physically or mentally do the job anymore, obviously. So now you have your Great Council underneath. Now the Great Council, let's say your president is one person. Your Great Council is going to be around 24 people, and these 24 people will decide the president. Then below them you have your Chamber of Estates, and he's using German numbers here too, of course, according to the population. So you're going to have about 110 members in the Chamber of Estates, and these are all to offset each other. Now the Chamber of Estates, they represent what are called these vocational councils, and how he has Germany set up is in different districts. He breaks it down by districts, and each of these districts will have a vocational council and a leader and a president of their vocational council. And these vocational council will be made up of guild members. They'll be made up of these syndicates that we're speaking about earlier, either the agricultural syndicates or the syndicates of the liberal arts and etc. They're different positions. Now these syndicates will make up these vocational councils. These vocational councils are essentially your smaller government in the districts. Much, if we can look at America, we can look at let's say each state would count as a vocational council, and so we would have our local state government in there. And just like you would have your senator or congressman to represent your state, your vocational council, that is who these Chamber of Estates are. They are like our congressmen and our senators. Then you have an even higher council of people, the Great Council, and these are the people who are more elite than the Chamber of Estates people. And then, of course, these are people heavily relied upon because they choose the president. They elect the president. So you would hope they're good quality people. So in this way, Strasserism sets up this, semi-representative, authoritarian in a way, kind of mixture of government here. You have everything broken down from small government all the way connected up to the president. And these Great Council and Chamber of States, these are not lifetime positions. The philosophy of liberal ethic has been and still is materialism. So once again, we see that the rejection of this liberal capitalistic materialism. We should be false to the teachings of history were we to deny that the source of Christianity did not flow from the spot where the heart of the West beats. So definitely strong Christian overtones. He thought Christianity and Europe went hand in hand, which is a contradiction to what Hitler believed. But he also believed that, Strasser that is, that a relationship between the state and the church is strongly in favor of the separation of the two. So not like Cadriano in the Iron Guard was, Strasserism was a theocracy in a way, but a separation of the two. Government for government, and religion is your own personal matter. Now on to some of the free speech and press. The press requires special consideration. Though on principle we demand the freedom of the press, liberty does not mean libertinage, as it has done often enough under liberal aspects. Guarantees will have to be given to ensure that the freedom shall not be misused. The most effective guarantee will be the insistence that every contribution to a periodical shall be signed. The abolition of anonymity and of the editorial we will make the writer responsible both politically and legally. So yeah, this is the same throughout all kind of fascist societies. You have the freedom of press. You even have the freedom to criticize. What you don't have is the freedom to needlessly attack, divide, and try to rouse people against the system. They're just not going to tolerate that. Though early, I have castrated and repudiated the liberal illusion concerning human equality, I nevertheless adherently champion the conservative doctrine that equality of opportunity is essential, that, as far as can be, all should be given to an equal start in the race of life. To give an equal start, education at the schools must be free, and the pupils will be gratuitously supplied with the requisite books and materials. So true meritocracy. Once again, we are not all equal as humans, but we will have the equal opportunity to try to achieve what we want to achieve. And you will not be held back because you're poor. You will not be held back because of any other ethnic, religious, social factor. You will simply be held back if you can't do it. And it's as simple as that. If you're not the best person for the job, well, then you're not going to get the job. The person who is the best person for the job is going to get the job. But you're going to have the equal opportunity to prove who's the best person for the job. Now he goes into a little bit of the education structure here. The subjects taught in the elementary school will be German, history, arithmetic, knowledge of homeland, and the beginnings of natural science, bodily exercises, gardening, simple technical training, the aim being not to impart information but to educate Germans. At high school, education will be more diversified. Since German culture will have been thoroughly instilled at the elementary school, alien cultures can now be taught, for there will be little risk of alien contamination. When the high school education is finished, selection of pupils for the university will take place. Here, it is not simply the amount of knowledge that one has been acquired which will be taken into consideration, but also the character that will be considered desirable in a person destined to become one of the future leaders of the German people. The decisive feature of the selection will be not that the youngsters, or their parents for them, want university education, but the will of the community as expressed through the teaching staff and the examiners, who must have had plenty of practical experience. So you set up at elementary school are the basic foundations, and then as you go into high school, you're going to learn more about the world, but you have a solid base. But then you learn more at high school, and now instead of anyone and everyone wanting to go to university, this becomes a privileged class where it's only people who are deemed fit to go into university to go into, because basically it looks like it's being created here, and he pretty much says it, is this kind of pseudo-socialist, pseudo-democratic aristocracy is what's trying to be created here. So, and those are the people in your greater councils, chamber councils, and all of this, and the people who would be filling a lot of these roles are the people that are going to university. So for that reason, it's not just simply, oh, we have abundant money, everyone can go to college. No, only the people that A, have the means and know-how, B, have the drive and will, and C, have the character to go into university will go into university. And these people will later on become the upper echelons of society. But after high school, as you either go into your job vocation or you go into university, it matters not. You will first go into a universal labor service. He states that he has a voluntary army service, but universal labor service. And he says, this supplementary testing will be effected in the universal labor service and in the voluntary army service. For all young Germans of both sexes, the close of early vocational training will be followed by a year of labor service in which the pupil will have to learn about the handicraft. This year of labor service, during which the pupils will lead a comradely life that will be of considerable social importance, will also enable young Germans to revise their choice of a vocation, and will subject them to a process of selection that will help them to close, after they have left elementary school, that they are fitted for intellectual vocation. So it gives the young Germans time to figure out what they want to do in life. Maybe they enjoy what they're doing. And this universal labor service, I really love that. I even think you should have universal military service for a certain amount of time. But just sticking to Strasserism, I love the idea of universal labor. I wish we would do it here in America, because something like if you're working a year on beautification of your area, and you're going around picking up litter for a year, 20 years down the road, when you're well into your job, you will be less likely to litter. You will be a lot less likely to litter yourself because you've done the job, you picked it up, you know what goes into it, and then you take pride in your work too. You make pride in cleaning your streets. So this helps instill that into you, and that goes for everything: planting trees, etc., etc. Whatever universal labor you get thrown into, you will automatically gain a new respect for that and appreciation for it. So I think that's a very good thing, and it's unfortunate we haven't done that here in America. So as with every fascistic idea worth a damn, a part of the structure and the platform is creating the new man. He calls it the new spirit in here. So we'll go into a little bit of what he says about this new spirit, this new German. I may mention as a fundamental idea of German law that the protection of honor is more important than the protection of things and rights. Another very important notion is that the Roman Christian idea of punishment must be replaced by the Teutonic idea of reparation and compensation, and that the essential purpose of legal activity is not to discover individual blame, but to prevent injury to society. The basic difference between the German law of tomorrow and the civil code of today will result in a complete change as regards to punishments, and above all will reduce to a minimum the present absurd practice of punishing people by depriving them of liberty. Will give place to making him compensate whoever has been injured by imposing a fine which will be levied in case of need by making the offender work in a state workhouse without imprisonment. All offenses against the community will be expiated by the excluding the offender from the community temporarily or permanently, either by banishment or death. Thereby, a repetition of the offense will be prevented. So, basically, he wants to end the whole prison punishment culture and say if crimes, let's say like theft, burglary, destruction of property, even assault, these can all be compensated. Someone can be put to work and learn to become a better citizen, and through that, given the opportunity to contribute back to a society instead of being thrown into a cage and being punished and essentially learning nothing and getting released again, even worse than he was when he went in, which is generally what happens to the majority of the inmates that go into the prison structure. So it's he's looking at different methods of dealing with crime. But if you do murder, if you do commit these horrendous crimes, whatever they are, like a child molestation or things like that, you're either banished or killed. I mean, you're dealt with permanently. So it's not being soft on criminals. It's because banishment and death is still there. I would imagine banishment much less than death would be used. But yeah, for capital crimes, you're going to have capital punishment. But outside of that, they're going to try to make you be a contributing member. Their aim is to insist upon the need for cultivating an elite of the German people in accordance with the ideal type that shall conform to the essential nature of Germans. This ideal type must be deeply rooted in the constitutional characteristics of the German people, and must therefore have the traits which the study of German history from the beginnings have made familiar to us. And yet, on the other hand, it must be modern enough to conform with the requirements of the socialist order to be established in the 20th century. Both demands be fulfilled by producing an old German type of knight, a chivalrous being whose best characteristics are embodied in all the greatest figures of German civilization, and who stand forth from the earlier conservative epics of German history. So his ideal man is the Germanic knight of old, chivalry, honor, things of that nature being the strong motivational factors. Like he just said, like I read off earlier, I mentioned the fundamental idea of German law is the protection of honor is more important than the protection of things and rights. That says a lot right there. That's the mentality we're going for, and it's reinvigorating honor. Your things mean nothing, and your rights are just imaginary. They are whatever the controlling people say they are. But your honor is immortal. Honor is what makes the man. No political, social, and economic methods of organization would be of permanent value unless this work were crowned by the deliberate inauguration and cultivation of a new spirit. This spirit of the new Germany must and will be a repudiation of the belief that might and force should regulate the social life of mankind. There must and will be a recognition, both in the substance and in form, that voluntary collaboration is to be the basis of a human society. And that's what Strasserism strives to obtain, is this voluntary collaboration. This is why he has the vocational councils set up by districts, and the chamber councils, the grade councils, etc., all these forms of government, wanting to create this voluntary collaboration between the people. So Strasser also believed in what he called the European Federation, which is basically like the EU today. He believed it was, well, let's say it's like the EU today, but if the EU actually cared for the preservation and advancement of Europe and Europeans, then that's what the European Federation would have been. But it's the same kind of thing he was talking about, as with a monocurrency amongst them, a gathering of leaders of each country to make the decisions for each country. It was very similar to what the EU is today. Now let's dive into a quick run through of some of the major differences between Hitlerism and Strasserism here, and this could probably be what led to Hitler just outright ignoring their political platform in 1925. First, we have the Jewish question. They definitely differed on this. While the Nazis had the 1/4 law, and anyone who did not fit within those racial guidelines were labeled foreigners and encouraged to leave Germany, Strasser believed, as he states here, "I have expressed the utmost disapproval of the shameless and inhuman anti-Jewish campaign that has characterized the Hitler system." And I may also mention that as early as 1928, in a party periodical, I protested editorially against anti-Semitism of the Stryker brand, voicing the war cry, "Anti-Semitism is dead, long live the idea of the people." This advocacy of the idea of the people logically implied the disavowal of any valuation of peoples or nations as good or bad, as better or worse, since they all have equal rights, equal needs, and equal duties in accordance with the will of the Creator, who gave each of them its own kind, its own nature, and its own task. This profound respect for organic life, and the fact that it is necessary for us and incumbent on us to recognize and maintain human dignity, imply that it will be an unconditional part of the social political organization of New Germany to maintain the equal rights of human beings. That was his belief as far as the Jewish question goes. Some of his alternatives to deal with the Jewish question, he says, politically considered are three alternative solutions. 1. Persons of different racial origin from the majority may be described as foreigners. 2. Groups of persons of various racial stamps may be deemed to constitute national minorities. 3. Peoples belonging to different stocks may be incorporated into the main body of the nation by assimilation. So he goes on to explain, like, in depth more what he means by these three positions. And the first one, he speaks about how the Zionist movement grew, and how it was, they can be described as foreigners because they wanted to return to Israel themselves. And then you have the second group, who are basically racial minorities in the country. They hold on to their identity still. They're Jews, they follow the religion, but they are German citizens. But they're not ethnically or racially or spiritually considered German, but they're German citizens, and they just constitute a national minority. Now it's kind of like saying, like, the black Americans, we won't consider them white. They won't be white Americans, but they will be a minority within America. They'll still follow the laws of America, but they'll have their own culture and their own ways, and etc. And then the third being the just pure assimilation, that Jews disregard their religion, breed with Germans, become Germans in religion. I guess converting to Christianity would be one of his ways of doing that, and just accepting German life and assimilating to life. And that's kind of like what the whole tale of the melting pot of America. That's basically what he's saying here, that they can assimilate into the German blood and culture. So these were definitely positions that the Hitlerian side of National Socialism definitely disagreed with. Like I said, they had the 1/4 law, and of course there was exceptions made here and there, but typically it was you went off the law of blood. Now another thing, and this was probably the main thing and the first thing they disagreed on with the Hitlerians and the Strasserists, and that was the taking and redistributing of land of wealthy estates. And that's a lot of, because once again, now underneath Strasser, land is not private. So these wealthy German aristocrats they wouldn't have the right to, 1,000 acres, whatever they're owning. That would be taken and divided up as deemed fit by the state. And this was something that Hitler was just not about. This was one of the main things, if not the main dividing point, amongst the more socialist branch of the National Socialist and Hitler. Hitler did not want to attack the German aristocracy, but instead tried to incorporate them into his new Germany. Now, ironically enough, much like Caesar was murdered by the very Senate he showed mercy to, Hitler too was betrayed constantly by the German aristocracy. Everything the aristocracy could do, from assassination attempts on his life to undermining his orders, was done in a deceitful manner to thwart Hitler. Meritocracy and the reality of being outdone by low-born Germans was just too much a bitter pill for some of the aristocracy to swallow. And that was the sad case of it. I mean, there was a couple of his attempts on his life were done by the aristocracy, and most importantly, there was times he was giving orders, and they weren't even following his orders, because they wanted to sabotage what he was doing. And in fact, there's even cases of higher up, German aristocracy, high-ranking people, generals and whatnot, that were giving false reports to their own military and getting their own military killed, getting their own German sons killed, because they spited Hitler so much. They wanted him to lose. They thought it'd be better for them. They actually thought they could kill him. And this is something Strasser thought too. They thought, we can just get rid of Hitler and make peace. They didn't realize there was no peace for Germany. They didn't realize Hitler tried over and over and over again to make peace with Britain. Churchill was a warmonger, and he got the war he wanted, and he was not going to give that war up for anything, even if it meant his own country. So these fools, and thinking they could sue for peace somehow as soon as they got rid of Hitler, just did not know the reality of the situation. They wanted to break the back of Germany, and they would not stop the war until they did that. And that's exactly what they did. They broke the back of Germany. Go look at Germany now. It's a nation of cucks. So they broke their back. And the war wasn't going to end until that. So the aristocracy was blind to that, and so was Strasser. Because you can look at a lot of what Strasser wrote. I can imagine some of it came after he left Germany, but it looked like he tried to appease the West here and there with a lot of what he was doing. But that fell on deaf ears. That was a waste of time. So the aristocracy, even though Hitler went to bat for them, even though there was a good chunk of the Nazi party that were a lot more socialist than Hitler was. Once again, Hitler was a pragmatist. He was actually more Machiavellian than anything else. And these people were socialist idealists, these Strasserites and the Drexler types. And, they wanted the aristocracy to be dealt with and kind of be broken down and say, you're not as special as you think you are. But Hitler thought it was better to work with them. And in times he was right, and times he wasn't right. Because like I said, they did betray him. Members of the aristocracy did betray him. They didn't do it, in unison, but there was fractions of them that did. Now, as far as religion, Strasser felt Christianity was the lifeblood of Europe, while Hitler felt it was a foreign bacteria infecting the blood of Europe. So there was definitely a disagreement there on how to go forward with the religious angle. And lastly, Hitler believed in top-down leadership, authoritarianism, while Strasserism believed in a fractionized ownership-type syndicates and a three-tier governmental makeup that seeks to create possible checks and balances amongst each other. So there was the big difference in there too, which led to just there were oil and water. There were oil and water. To say who's right and wrong is pointless. We know who was successful and who wasn't successful. And, if we look at it that way, we see why Hitler, came to the top, why the cream rises to the top, as they say. But that is your synopsis of Strasserism right there. It's although he would not himself describe it fascistic, in fact, he described something else. He described fascism as something else, and he specifically looked at the Italian model. But he was actually inaccurate. A lot of the things he expressed were very similar to what was going on in Italy, and maybe it was ignorance on his part, or maybe he was just so hell-bent to distance himself from, the term fascist. So it starts with the Black Front and Strasserism. But I would definitely consider Strasserism a branch of fascism. It's very fascistic in spirit and policy and principle. So although he would not consider it that at all, it would be Strasserism as far as he's concerned, its own, his own political creation. But whatever it is, that is Strasserism for you wrapped up. Suggested readings, I would say, are Germany Tomorrow, which has the whole platform of Strasserism in there, and his memoirs, Hitler and I, which I would say take with a grain of salt. My personal educated opinion is filled with lies, and they're easy to point out once, especially if you, like I said, if you read all the other memoirs, and you can gauge a personality from that, and you can also gauge that same personality expressed in those memoirs as in table talk. So if you can put all that together, and then you line that up against Otto Strasser's one book that paints a completely different portrait of Hitler, I think it's pretty easy to tell that he fantasized some of these things, and he definitely did it with an intent to harm Hitler's character. But whatever the case, those are the two suggested readings for this video.